I offer these every week along with a guided meditation. Just click the subscribe link below to be notified through YouTube when I post the latest recording. Or if you'd like to join us live, which would be great, just go into the description section below and follow the link along to be able to sign up for free. So I'd like to explore with you the Buddhist notion of equanimity, which is not restricted to just Buddhism, but I'm going to be approaching it in the Buddhist context. And you can see, of course, what's useful for you here. As a way of moving into this topic, I invite you to take a look at the last couple of comments in the chat, and which echo previous comments from others here. From Donna at 43 minutes past the hour. These last 2 weeks have been very difficult and stressful. My sister almost died. I am looking forward to learning how to help myself in turbulent times. Or from Ivan, I've been building inner resources through your program for 3 years, but I'm feeling stuck. I made a big career change at 53, landed a job, and then the place shut down. On top of that, I realized how much environments, like working under blue fluorescent lights, are affecting me. Now at 54, I don't have the same energy I used to, and I'm struggling to find stability while feeling the weight of financial insecurity. Job searching feels dehumanizing, and I can't shake the frustration, resentment, and envy that come up when I see others thriving while I'm just trying to get by. Ivan continues, how do I move forward without these feelings taking over? How do I keep a sense of possibility when everything feels so uncertain? And others would have similar kinds of things to say. What do we do when we're really shaken? We're really mad at the state of the world. I'm really mad. The older I get, the calmer I get, and the madder I get. What do we do? What do we do when our heart aches for other people? What do we do when we're just really rattled by an immediate situation, or when somebody cuts us off on the freeway and nearly hits our car, and then makes a rude gesture to us on the way by? Brr. So I want to explore with you, what do we do with those real things? And that's the context for this exploration. So equanimity is a fancy word. It essentially means emotional balance. It's fundamentally an inner stability amidst inner and outer changes. Everything keeps changing. As Alan Watts put it, life is wiggly. Equanimity is a kind of inner freedom in our relationship to what we're experiencing. Now, to be clear, equanimity is not at all pushing feelings down. It's not at all apathy. It's not at all a spiritual bypass. And the development of equanimity is a process. So when in the moment, or in the present, we are very affected by, let's say, nearly losing, a loved one or losing them. If we're affected by that, or we're affected by the economy, or we're appalled at certain aspects of our politics, in that moment, we don't have much equanimity. That's understandable. That's understandable. So I want to create a frame here in which I'm going to go into the topic of equanimity. If you're familiar with my own work, you may have heard me say this before. In my own background with the vast warehouse of psychospiritual tools, in my experience, they basically sort into 3 kinds of tools, 3 skillful means for engaging the inner world, our own mind. This is distinct from what we can do with the outer world, although it's pretty relevant there too. We can first and foremost simply be with what we're experiencing. In the moment, let's say we're very upset about our sister nearly dying, or in the moment, as Ivan writes, we experience frustration, resentment, envy, worry. That's what we're feeling in the moment. the best we can do is simply to be with it. Now, being with it means we are not hijacked by it. We are not carried away by it. We're getting some breathing room from it. We're able to witness it. We're able perhaps to name it to ourselves, which neurologically does good things like increases activation in prefrontal regions in the brain that help us to manage things, and also calms down emotional reactivity centers in the brain like the amygdala, simply to name how we're feeling. We're not trying to change how we're feeling. We're just simply being with it, but we're doing so in a spaciousness of mindfulness. Uh, there are aspects of being with what you're experiencing that really help, like having compassion for yourself and how it's landing on you, and also bringing to bear qualities of curiosity and investigation so you can unpack and explore and feel down into, including all the way down to the younger levels of what has gotten stirred up. These are all aspects of being with the mind. Now, just this alone, in my experience as a longtime therapist and as someone who, has definitely had, a fair amount of unhappiness to deal with in his life, this is 50% roughly. Just this disidentification. I have these feelings distinct from I am these feelings. That itself is very helpful for mental health. It's helpful for your physical health, and it enables a lot better coping because then we're not so carried away. We're not so hijacked by whatever we're experiencing. That's being with. Being with itself sometimes leads to healthy changes in what we're being with. Just the process of unpacking, opening up, accepting it, feeling it fully, the rest of that allows a kind of natural flowing to occur, or there might be insight into it. Beautiful. But very often, simply being with your mind is not enough. We have to work with it as well. And working with the mind has two fundamental aspects. This corresponds to the wise effort element in the Eightfold Path in Buddhism, in which we reduce, release, or even prevent that which is painful, stressful, and harmful. And we also encourage, we create, we protect, we grow that which is beneficial and enjoyable for ourselves and others. In effect, to summarize, three great ways to engage your mind, to practice with your mind, are to let be, let go, and let in. That's a very fundamental framework here. And it's the basis in which I'm now going to be exploring more about empathy. Becoming increasingly skillful at letting be, letting go, and letting in is a journey of a lifetime, and I'm still on it. I have found that many people are pretty good at letting be, and they could definitely get more skillful with letting go and especially letting in. Very often people be with their experience, they be with their mind, and then they move into releasing what's there. Great. But they don't replace what they've released with various inner strengths or factors inside, including positive mood itself, that can build up more and more inside them what's good. It's a little bit like if your mind is a garden, you can witness it, pull weeds, but don't forget to plant flowers. Okay, so the examples that we've had here so far, for example, such as nearly or actually losing a loved one, or dealing with really tough conditions, trying to find work again in mid-50s, changing environments, job insecurity, financial uncertainty. We can be with all those feelings. Then we can move into letting go as we can, and then we can move into growing qualities inside that would really help us to deal with these particular conditions, whatever that might be. And certainly one of those qualities that I think can be very, very helpful to develop, certainly recommended by the Buddha in a number of his lists, is equanimity. So equanimity has to do with our relationship to what we're experiencing. Calm or tranquility means essentially not having reactions. Okay, that often is pretty helpful. You decide for yourself if it would be helpful for you to have greater access to calm and even sometimes a greater sense of tranquility and inner peace. Beautiful. That's not equanimity, though. Equanimity, in effect, is to rest in a kind of place inside or a ground inside that itself is not disturbed, no matter what disturbances are passing through awareness. In effect, with equanimity, we don't react to our reactions. Right? Our reactions may still be occurring. We're not fighting with them. We're not suppressing them. They're still going by, but it's as if we can rest in a refuge, potentially way down deep inside, that 1% of you or 1/10 of 1% of you that is not blown out of the water, retains a fundamental inner stability, a fundamental inner freedom in relationship to the other 99 or 99.9% of what's passing through awareness. That's the fundamental notion of equanimity. Equanimity occurs alongside other qualities of your mind. Equanimity can occur alongside compassion, alongside kindness, alongside happiness about the welfare of others. These are, by the way, you may have noticed, the four so-called Brahma Viharas or immeasurables or dwelling places, that we can aspire to: equanimity, compassion, kindness, and what's sometimes called altruistic or sympathetic joy, happiness for the welfare of others. They all can go together and they support each other. By retaining a fundamental stability deep down inside, we're much more able to enter into the suffering of other people with empathy and compassion. By retaining that inner stability inside, we're more able to act on our compassion that recognizes major sources of suffering in unjust systems and does what we can along with others to decrease those systemic sources of suffering. Equanimity enables the long marathon of those efforts over time. Okay, so how do we develop equanimity? I want to say first that I hope it's clear why equanimity is a good thing. You can disagree and see for yourself. Please understand how I'm using this word, not as numbing, not as apathy, not as suppressing or denying what's really true for you, but as developing, growing, a deepening, inherent place or level or field of unshakable, untroubled peacefulness that can contain a very heavy heart at personal suffering or the suffering of others. How do we develop this equanimity? I want to talk about a framework of what's called the two wheels of the wagon of awakening, or the two tracks that we follow as we heal and grow and awaken. One is the track of developing. So we develop a growing capacity to be with the mind and to work with the mind in a variety of ways. And I'll talk about these specifically related to equanimity. That's a very important track, the track of gradual development, which includes releasing that which is burdensome over time. The other track is the track of what is already true, the good news that is already true about yourself, your deep nature, the deepest levels of your own being, what is true about reality, and in particular, what is true about what the Buddha pointed to as the ultimate timeless, unconditioned, deathless ground of all, in which time-bound, conditioned, clockwork unfolding of the Big Bang universe is occurring. So we have the path of developing and the path of already in terms of equanimity. So 3 factors related to the path of developing, and you can engage these in your own life. The first is what I'll call the factor of fullness. And if you'd like to know more about what I mean by this, I encourage you to check out the chapter titled Resting in Fullness. I think it's chapter 5 in my book, Neurodharma. It's essentially the fact that, as Robert Sapolsky put it, zebras don't get ulcers. In other words, Mother Nature's biological plan for her little critters is to spend most of their time in a state of equanimity, in effect, in which they feel like their needs are being met well enough in the present already. And on the basis of that, they, remain safe or do little things to be safe. They do little things to be fed. They make their connections with others. But essentially, they're okay, right? And they're okay because they experience that their needs are being sufficiently met enough in the present, particularly 3 key needs for safety, satisfaction, and connection. Then the lions attack. Boom! The needs are now for safety certainly unmet. Whoosh! There's a spike of red zone stress, which, as Sapolsky puts it, ends quickly one way or another. And then the zebras go, or at least most of them, if not all of them, go back to the green zone, a state of relative equanimity, biologically speaking, a state of equilibrium and sustainable balance. That's Mother Nature's plan. And the problem is that humans, because of our big brains and big minds, are, particularly in modern times, can be very vulnerable and very easily prodded into a state of chronic mild stress and sometimes major stress, in which it doesn't feel like your needs are being sufficiently met in the moment. And understandably, people move into, anxiety and anger in terms of safety, or move into a sense of frustration, disappointment, or greediness, drivenness in terms of the need for satisfaction, or can move into a state of envy or ill will or shame or insecurity or deep hurt in terms of their need for connection. So what can we do? Remembering that we're not trying to lie about what is actually happening in the world or inside us. We certainly can do what we can in the outer world to influence it to better and better meet our needs. I was interviewed earlier today by a 7th grader, a wonderful kid. I'll protect their identity. And at one point in the conversation in which the 7th grader was asking me about, what advice would I give to improve mental health? I said, well, first and foremost, the greatest challenge to mental health in the world, including in America, is poverty. If you want to improve mental health as well as other good outcomes, make a generational effort to lift everyone, including nearly 1 in 5 children in America today, out of poverty. That would do a lot for mental health. So we do what we can to address sources of meeting needs in the outer world, and also do what we can to address challenges to that. That said, meanwhile, the world is wiggly, often imperfect. Often we're dealt a tough hand in the cards that we've been dealt in life, including sometimes in our own biology. What can we do? With regard to fullness, the sense of fullness in the present or enoughness, I think there are 2 major strategies inside ourselves. One major strategy is to grow the inner strengths of various kinds, like resilience, determination, emotional intelligence, executive functions, healing insecure attachment, impulse control, commitment to healthy behaviors, commitment to exercise, commitment to sobriety, and other factors. Grow the inner strengths that enable us to meet challenges to our needs with a relative amount of balance, not getting hijacked into fighting, fleeing, freezing, and appeasing. Inner strengths enable us to deal with challenges to safety, satisfaction, and connection while retaining a fundamental peacefulness, contentment, and love inside. That enables us to be more equanimous if we can do that. Just because the world is flashing red doesn't mean necessarily that you need to be flashing red on your inner dashboard. We can function and cope with challenges to safety without being invaded by fear, anger, or helplessness, right? It's possible, particularly as you grow strengths in proportion to the size of the challenges. Routinely, I see people who have challenges that are this big and their inner resources for dealing with those challenges are this big, not as a criticism, just as an opportunity. Oh, let's see how to grow those inner resources, those inner strengths, alongside intervening in the world, including other people, as much as you can, knowing often that it's often pretty limited there. Meanwhile, grow your inner strengths. That's in part why zebras don't get ulcers, because most of the time they are sufficiently resourced to deal with their life in a state of healthy equilibrium. Major strategy. What are the inner strengths that would help you stay in the green zone, that would help you to remain relatively at ease in the core of your being, given the challenges you face these days? What are you trying to develop? It's great to have a growth mindset in general, but it's really helpful to have a growth toolkit applied to specific forms of growth, right? Growth mindset alone is awesome, but it needs as well a toolkit that we use to grow particular things. What are you growing these days? The second major strategy with regard to resting in fullness, this first of three aspects of developing that I'm talking about here, is to repeatedly internalize the felt sense of needs met enough in the moment when they are. Very often we're actually basically all right now in the present, relatively safe enough in the present, whatever the future may hold. But do we feel it? Very often there's an enoughness of food, of fulfillment, of accomplishing, of getting stuff done. It's a remarkable world. You can have a lot of gladness and gratitude. There's that opportunity there. But how often do we feel it? Very often, our own heart is warm. There's a fundamental kindness. We wish others well. How often do we recognize that? How often do we recognize that when others are caring and including, appreciating, friendly, and even loving toward us? So we have opportunities, many times a day probably, to let it land, that you can relax craving, the second noble truth that leads to suffering and harm. You're okay enough in the present, and help that experience sink in to emotional memory systems. So increasingly you carry it with you wherever you go, even as you meet the next challenge in life. When you cultivate these inner strengths, that's one strategy. And when you repeatedly internalize the felt sense in a bodily way of needs met enough, then that builds up inner shock absorbers, inner buffers that help you meet the wiggliness and the challenges of life, while still maintaining a relatively even keel in the core of your being, even if some of the periphery of your being, the outer edges, is getting a little singed. Okay. Second major strategy in terms of what we can be developing is insight. A great deal of the teachings of the Buddha related to equanimity have to do with insight. Now, I think as a psychologist, I can't help myself. As a longtime therapist, Freud also talked about insight. And that sort of insight had to do a lot with the content of consciousness, the content of the mind, of the content of what we're experiencing. So there's a place for developing insight into the forces inside you that still trigger you. So you have more awareness of them, and they gradually, therefore, can move more into the field of, healthy self-regulation, insight into yourself, insight into practical matters with other people, insight into, as I've had to learn slowly but surely, in your life, that maybe to you, you don't think you're being very intense, but other people are being fairly impacted by that. Whoa, that's an insight. Insight into the outer world, insight into the fact that maybe there's some people in your life who have no interest in repairing with you. Or maybe insight that there are people in your life that would be prepared to deepen their relationship with you. There are lots of kinds of insight, practical insight, really good. Additionally, the Buddha had talked about a lot of insight into the process of consciousness, not just the contents of consciousness. And for example, one of his major points of insight was to observe what's called the hedonic tone of experience, often translated as the feeling tone of experience, typically as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. I would add also an emerging hedonic tone that I believe is occurring in the evolution of sophisticated primates like us, and probably the other great apes, and probably also some of the cetaceans, like whales and dolphins and porpoises. Anyway, the sense of things as relational. Well, when the hedonic tone is occurring, particularly pleasant and unpleasant, that has a certain intensity to it, like it, don't like it, what happens next? The Buddha really recommended insight into the space between the hedonic tone and what follows. And in that space in which we're developing insight, there is an inner freedom, as Viktor Frankl put it, between impulse and between stimulus, therefore, and impulse or response. So we can develop more and more insight in real time, faster and faster. Starts out maybe, over the course of several minutes, then we get it into several seconds. We even start noticing things in fractions of seconds as we become increasingly mindful. Insight into the space between that hedonic tone and what happens next, so we can create more of a buffer there. The Buddha also recommended insight into impermanence, the changingness of experience, recognizing even the big picture of changingness over time. Empires rise and fall. I think about once I started reading Will and Ariel Durant's volume in their masterpiece history about the Reformation period, the 1300s and around that time. And I would read about people, both wonderful people and terrible tyrants, who had huge consequences for decades in that part of the world. I never heard of them. Never. Whatever they did, I'm not diminishing whatever happened, good or bad, but over time, it kind of fades out into the vast river of time. There's a place for that kind of perspective, not to lead to apathy or disengagement, but just big picture. That's a kind of insight. Insight into the fact that all phenomena, just about all phenomena, are made of parts that are connected and changing, thus empty of solidity, independence, and permanence. Everything is processes and relationships. This starts out kind of intellectual and maybe philosophical, but over time, you start to hold your experiences more lightly when you recognize how transient and dynamic and changing any particular experience is, and the ways that it connects to everything else, which has the implication increasingly that, you can take things less personally. More and more is occurring impersonally. It doesn't mean that it hurts any less, but it does mean that as you recognize the selflessness, the impersonality in the interconnectedness of everything is an impersonality a kind of unfolding that you need not take so personally, which adds to whatever hurt or discomfort is understandably already there. Insight. Insight is really helpful as a factor in the developing of equanimity. And then the third major factor I want to name in the developing of equanimity is love. Whoa. Love first contains both fullness and insight, because love, broadly stated, flowing out and flowing in, is a fundamental biological factor of safety. As we feel more connected to others and as we rest in our own heart, fear naturally declines. We still see threats, we still see hazards and challenges, we still have to cope with them, but we're able to do so in a more balanced way as we access and strengthen our own heart. Love is also, of course, very fulfilling and satisfying, and it takes care of that need. And of course, love is connecting to others. So in that broad sense, love is the universal medicine. Love brings us home. As we develop greater equanimity through fullness, insight, and love, we come home to ourselves. Love also teaches us what insight teaches us, that we're profoundly interconnected. Everything occurs interdependently. Love teaches that as well. So love is very, very powerful. And it's no surprise that the great teachers emphasize it. You might ask yourself, where are you in your own developing of, the muscle of the heart? I had a teacher a long time ago who said to a group of men, essentially, hey, you're all into building your muscles. What about the muscle of your heart? Which, of course, would apply, to all beings, not just people who identify as male. And so, one of the more important moments in my own life was a long time ago when I was in a relationship with someone who, was kind of blowing me out of the water with how they were being. And I realized I had a choice. And I decided to, for at least a while, I would see what would happen eventually, to keep doing love push-ups, strengthen love as a kind of capacity that we can strengthen in ourselves. And that really helped, keep the relationship going and, really encouraged some good results there. So you might ask yourself, what are you working on these days, in terms of, or developing these days in the broad field of love? Are you developing greater compassion, greater kindness? Are you developing the capacity to have compassion while resting in moral judgment about other people in ways that you consider appropriate and just? Can you combine those? That's often the growing edge for a lot of people, to be able to integrate kindness and compassion with maintaining boundaries and speaking truth to power and asserting yourself and seeing other people really clearly without putting them out of your heart. That can be a growing edge for a lot of us. Okay? So these are 3 ways to develop greater equanimity in the one of the 2 tracks in the, the great path of awakening that's about developing qualities. And to be able to do this, there are 3 prerequisites. One is you have to intend to develop equanimity in the first place. I've seen various comments about equanimity like, oh, it's a spiritual bypass, or somehow it's opposed to activism and outrage. No. A correct understanding of the Buddhist notion of equanimity is that it is not opposed to outrage. It is not opposed to injustice. The Buddha was really quite fierce about various things, and there's some famous stories of various monastics soon after the Buddha passed away who were asked by kings in peril of their own life. And the monastics were very courageous and direct and straight in what they said to the ruling power. There's a proverb in Buddhism that people are not wise just because they can recite the scriptures. People are truly wise who are peaceable, friendly, and fearless. That's the sweet spot of equanimity. Okay. Second prerequisite to develop the three qualities that I'm describing, or these three ways to develop equanimity through developing greater fullness, insight, and love, is mindfulness. We need to be mindful. We need to be able to get some breathing room from our reactions in the moment. We need to be mindful of our own process of developing equanimity in various ways and what the results are. We have to be mindful. It's necessary. You can't do it without it. And also, just factually, in the moment when we're just blasted open or blown out of the water or shattered by a catastrophic loss, don't try to be equanimous then. It's not real. It's not happening. It's not possible. Perhaps ultimately, you could, I don't know what. I don't even want to say it. You could do this or that to someone who's completely enlightened, which I believe is indeed attainable. And then people keep going. That's a whole other topic. But anyway, and maybe it's possible to be just completely, permanently equanimous. I don't know. I think you could zap the nervous system at a sufficient level in which at least ordinary consciousness is completely incapable of being equanimous. So don't be too hard on yourself when you can't access your equanimity. Try to be with it as best you can, as I've said. Get through it, doing as little harm as possible to yourself and others. And then when things settle down at least a bit, imagine the 0 to 10 scale of pain, overwhelm, physical, emotional pain, 0 to 10. If you're at a 10 or past your own threshold of being able to be equanimous, that's the truth of it for you at that time. Try to get through it, be with it, and so forth. But when you come down at least a few notches from just boom, being completely shattered and blown away, all right, that's where it's the opportunity to try to find your equanimity and actually develop it. And over time, as we grow our equanimity, as Gil Fronsdal puts it, we expand the range of experiences in which we are free. And on my 0 to 10 scale, maybe from 5 or worse, we're unfree. We're just completely blown away. Okay, but over time, maybe you can develop the capacity to retain that inner freedom, even with a 5 or a 6 or a 7 over time. That's an ongoing process. Okay, so with those prerequisites, and now having finished talking about these kind of 3 major ways to develop equanimity through cultivating fullness, cultivating insight, and cultivating love, now I want to talk about the path of already in 2 kind of levels. And I offer this here to you as I move increasingly outside of the scientific frame of the natural universe. I'm not trying to persuade you. I'm just trying to name 2 things that you might already have a sense of or could develop a greater awareness over time. It's not so much that we develop these 2, I hate to use the word things, but I'll say things in the moment. It's not that we develop them. It's more like we uncover them increasingly, and we also open to becoming increasingly established in them. These 2 things, quote unquote, gradually inhabit us as we inhabit them. So what are they? The first of these, and these 2 sort of flow into each other maybe, or join with each other. The first of these I'll call being. Deep down inside, especially as your mind gets a little quiet, you can recognize a kind of level or space deep inside that has inherent qualities of wakefulness, of kind of ongoing witnessing, untroubled witnessing, wakefulness, as well as a fundamental benevolence, fundamental leaning toward others or a wishing them well, and a fundamental wisdom. Wisdom emerges from the depths of your own being with an inherent kind of contentment already and love already. I'm not trying to make this up. It's more a matter of discovery and identification increasingly with these depths that are always already present in you, even if you're not aware of them. I believe that this sense of that being is an intrinsic aspect of our own body-mind, and available and visible, particularly as the mind quiets, visible to anyone who looks. Being. And then relating, kind of perhaps, connected to that, the Buddha taught that there is a fundamentally unconditioned, timeless, eternal, not subject to arising and passing away aspect to reality altogether. And some say that he's wrong. Others say that he might be correct, but it doesn't matter because this aspect of reality is unknowable and therefore irrelevant. And to them, I would say, and I think the Buddha would say, that they're simply mistaken. This is a genuine aspect of reality, this unconditioned, eternal ground. And in fact, because it is an intrinsic aspect of ultimate reality, it is accessible and knowable and experienceable here and now. And practice can be a gradual process of thinning the distinction or the separation between ordinary consciousness and this underlying ground. Some people, in addition to the characteristic of unconditionality, therefore timelessness, not arising and passing away, have a sense of a kind of awareness or consciousness in this ground, and also perhaps a quality of love. And you find those aspects of awareness and lovingness or benevolence really foregrounded, particularly in some of the major in the major religions of the world, alongside Buddhism. The Buddha himself, he kind of left it at unconditionality, timelessness, deathless, not subject to arising and passing away, and therefore the ultimate refuge. But he didn't go further, as best we know. Others have gone further to talk about consciousness and love as aspects of this ultimate, absolute ground of all. See for yourself. To finish here, to me, these two tracks support each other. The sense of what is always already true supports us and encourages us, and sometimes the frustrating and long journey of gradual development. And as we gradually develop, we, as they say in Tibet, gradually remove the obscurations to the true nature of ourselves and reality altogether. That's always already been the case. Okay. Finishing here, I think a lot of what practice is about is remembrance and return and recovery. We go through our days, we're relatively balanced, and then we see a headline in the news, or somebody says something to us, or we recall something, and then we're shaken. Then the question is, what's your process of return to reestablish that underlying stability, which in a way holds and contains what is disturbing and occurring, and enables you to practice with it more effectively and to cope more effectively with the outer world? What's that process like for you of resting, disturbance, and then return? That's so much of what practice is about. And we can help ourselves increasingly grow the sense of what we're resting in, so that, it takes a growing challenge to knock us out of that fundamental equilibrium that feels things deeply, but has a fundamental equilibrium. It takes bigger and bigger challenges to knock us, bigger and bigger waves to tip our boat, and then we recover, though, more and more rapidly. That's the overall process. Well, come to the end here. I hope this was useful for you, including applications in your own life, many of which, of course, are probably pretty relevant to people who care both about what's happening immediately in their circle around them and in the wider circles of their country and the world. And I really encourage you to keep developing your own personal equanimity, including through the methods that I've shared with you here. Yeah. Okay. So, Baus, thank you for your kind attention. You can tell this is a topic that I care about a lot. It's been very helpful for me, and I wish you well with it, very much wish you well with it.